Andrew Chin, Chief AI Officer at AllianceBernstein. Welcome, Andrew, and thank you for joining me. So, when I look back at the syllabi for your courses that you've taught here and the topics that you've sponsored for our students, I can literally, over the years, see the evolution of industry, right? In 2014, the project was a classic quant finance focused on hedging with options. By 2017, the project was all about financial text mining. In fact, I have to say, there was probably revolutionary at the time, and I think our students were kind of like ahead of the curve under your guidance. So if I fast forward today, our students are now experimenting with large language models to generate factors, build portfolios, etc. So clearly, you've been an incredible guidance to our students. I should also probably admit this publicly in this forum that you don't just challenge our students. You also challenge me. You are really the reason why I finally agreed that we definitely need an AI in finance certificate, that you and I have been collaborating and going to be co-instructors when it launches in spring. That initiative is a true collaboration between College of Engineering and Cornell School of Business, along with industry experts like you and some others. And I think that's the theme that we may have come back during this conversation in terms of, what is AI really bringing to industry and what kind of talent is going to inherit the future in finance. But before we get to all of this, you really are helping to lead this shift that artificial intelligence is bringing as one of the first chief AI officers in the industry. So can we start by you telling us, what is that shift? What it is really that you do as a chief AI officer? Like, what does the role entail?
Yeah. Thanks, Victoria, and it's good to see everybody. I should also note, Victoria, that you've been at the forefront of building quantitative talent, right, for the financial services industry. So that's been fantastic from a collaboration perspective. So my role right now is the Chief AI Officer for AllianceBernstein. In that role, I am to help the organization really transform how we do business by leveraging AI to hopefully empower us to make better and faster decisions.
Oh, this is the leadership for the 21st century finance. That's the way I see it. Before we get into the weeds, let us start with sort of like defining this, foundational thesis for today's conversation. I often hear opinions around AI that go along the lines of, all right, this is all about humans versus the machines. But I really think this is a very narrow approach, and it potentially can miss the real opportunity. This approach can miss the real opportunity, because much like in many aspects of human world, I think we should be, more focused on collaboration, working together. So from your point, in your ideal world, as a chief AI officer, is there a place for human-machine partnership? Or like, what would it look like? What do humans do great, and what can technology do better?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. I've been in the industry for over 30 years now. I might not look like it, but I've been in the industry for 30 years. And what I would say is we've been using AI ever since I joined the industry. So let me define what I mean by AI first, right? So usually I group AI into three categories. The first is traditional AI. And these are the machine learning techniques, that we all know and love, pattern recognition types of techniques. Secondly, there's Gen AI, which came about really with ChatGPT. So I think we know what that is. And then the third one is, I call it autonomous AI, agentic AI, right? Those are terms to describe these agentic frameworks to use AI. If you haven't heard about agentic AI, you will, because it will be in the industry for at least in the next couple of years. So if we think about it that way, we've been interacting with AI for quite a while, right? And in all those cases, we really partner with AI, and AI is really augmenting what we do, right? So now, having said that, we've seen so much progress and so much acceleration around AI in the last 2-3 years or so, right? We see these tools becoming very powerful, right? In some areas, doing more than what humans are capable of doing, and faster, right? So that's pretty exciting. Having said that, I think the other side is, with such powerful tools, we do have to consider what the impact is on ourselves and society, and of course in investments. What's the impact within the financial services industry, right? So looking at both of these sides, looking at these trade-offs, I think it's critical, right? Being able to manage this revolution, how to use these tools effectively in a responsible way, is really critical, right? So when I think about this machine-human collaboration, the analogy that I always like to draw on is the I'm person analogy. Have you seen Iron Man, Victoria? Have you seen the movie?
Yep.
Okay, so it's going to be based on that. So Iron Man, I'm person. So the point behind I'm person is that you have a smart subject matter expert inside, surrounded by armor, AI armor, that gives you hopefully fast and quick synthesis to help you make better and faster decisions. But the critical element there is the human. The human inside must be a subject matter expert. In our case, finance, right? You must be a great investor. You must be a great technologist. You must be a great accountant. Doesn't matter what it is. That subject matter expertise is foundational. But then you have these tools around you that hopefully can help you be even better, right? So that's why I like the Iron person analogy. Another reason why I like the analogy is because it's clear who has accountability for decision making. It's the human inside, right? So it's not the armor that says, hey, Andrew, do this or that, but it's the human inside that says, this is who's accountable. At the end of the day, you are responsible for the decision, right? So I think that's how I imagine future investors, future accountants, future salespeople to look like this Iron person analogy.
So in other words, we should view AI as a tool that strengthens our decision making, but it doesn't replace the human responsibility, right?
Yeah.
The judgment is human judgment is being replaced. That's when we actually probably see potential problems with AI utilization, right?
Yeah, I mean, these tools are becoming really, really powerful, as we said, right? And for routine problems and certainly some reasoning problems. But humans bring judgment, intuition, right, and experience that these tools do not yet have, right? So I think that is why it's critical, to use these tools in that way and not have these tools run autonomously, especially in financial services where we have a strong fiduciary responsibility for our clients.
We want to be correct 100% of the time, right? Like we don't want 99%, we want 100%.
That's right.
So if we accept this partnership, right, between human and artificial intelligence as the goal, then I'm guessing the next challenge would be turning the information that AI can help us extract into something that's genuinely useful. Many companies believe that they are very data-driven, but how many actually succeeding into translating that data that's now becoming, like what is the data even these days, right? That's turning them into an action. That seems still difficult. So what do you think is sort of like the most challenging implementation arises? Where do you see the disconnect, or is there a disconnect, right? And how should leaders, what should they do different? How they should be viewing this, AI decision-driven making?
Yeah. You're definitely right. I mean, data is the lifeline of these tools, right? Without good data, these tools are pretty much useless, right? So it all starts with data. So I would say first, having a good data governance program in your organization is critical, right? So this is from a top down, right? It's saying that, look, here's how we think about data. It is a lifestyle. Right. Data is an asset within our organization. And so it's everything around that. Ownership, lineage, just making it cleansing, storage, publishing, all those things that you normally do to make sure that you have good hygiene around data is critical, right? So I think that hopefully most organizations have that. But even with that, the AI does present some new challenges. So for example, right now there is a lot more unstructured data, right? Structured data is, think of it as stuff you can put into Excel or a database easily. Unstructured text, audio, video, stuff that's not easily, you can't easily put into an Excel spreadsheet, let's say, right? So anyway, so because of a lot of unstructured data, I think we have to figure out, well, what's the best way to ingest this information into our organizations so that we can use it for decision making, right? And that, along with that comes lots of different problems, right? Like what tools do I use to store this information? What tools do I use to synthesize, and really understand this information, right? So I think that's that's part of the consideration. So that's on the data side. Once you have the data, then you have to think about, well, what tools will I now use to really access and to make it accessible to my employees to use, right? So this is definitely where large language models and AI tools come in, right? What's the right platform for my employees to have so that they can access these tools easily, get insights from these tools easily, and things like that, right? So I think that's an important aspect. What I usually also like to say is that yes, we're in the age of AI, but let the questions really drive the tools that you use, right? It may turn out that AI is not the right thing, right? So, and as you know, sometimes a simple linear regression may solve the problem. And you know what? That's perfectly fine, right? So understand your problem and make sure that the tools that you use are fit for purpose, right? Don't just use, don't think everything's a nail when you have a hammer, right? So that's what I would say.
So almost you make me just think about, the data aspect, the first part that you were talking about. It's almost like AI is putting the pressure on organizations to review their whole data infrastructure, right? And their whole pipeline process from, like, what's my data? Where are they stored? How they stored? How can I use them? And then, all the way down through tools to the insight. Yeah. We're not limited by data, we're limited by clarity.
Yeah. Look, I usually think about like the 4 V's to describe what data means in this age of AI. So the first V is volume, more of it, as we just discussed. Right. Second V is velocity, which is coming at you much, much faster, right? And you have to respond much, much faster. That's certainly how the markets move. And certainly how our clients view interactions with us today. They demand an answer immediately, right? Velocity. Right. Third V is variety, right? So data comes to us in many different formats, whether it's text, audio, video, images or whatever. So certainly those 3 V's. But the fourth V, which is veracity, truthfulness, veracity, is the most important because, to your point, if you don't have good data, it doesn't really matter, right? And these tools really depend on high quality data. And the first comment that you made about organizations really having to come back to data before they use AI is 100% correct, right? So many of us are trying to make sure that we have strong foundational golden data so that we can then start to use them. One simple example could be a research analyst, right? They've been doing research for quite a while. They, like myself, we've accumulated research over, let's say, 10, 15 years, right? If you just blindly turn a large language model onto this, well, where does it look? Does it look from 15 years ago? Does it look at last week? I may have made some errors in my model a couple of years ago that I've cleaned up, but which one does it look at? Right. It might not know which is the right one, right? So cleansing the information and just structuring information in a way that these tools can use is actually critical. And that's part of the data hygiene process. Exactly.
That's a very good term, data hygiene. I love it. And of course, so let's say, data hygiene is in place and, the very responsible use of infrastructure and data. And finally, you get to the, how do you, again, implement that whole process from data to extracting valuable insight? In my opinion, you cannot get far in that process if you don't have the right environment, right? So it's almost like there's a cultural shift, or, like you need some cultural awareness and acceptance whether an AI initiative is going to succeed or stall. So really, in my opinion, it comes down to people being able to communicate and, communicate the challenges and, constructively discuss what it takes to get, again, from data to the insight. So if we do accept that AI adoption is as much a cultural shift as, a technical one. What does it take, in your opinion? And AllianceBernstein certainly has been terrific in doing this. What does it take to build a culture where business leaders, engineers, and data scientists trust each other and can speak the common language?
Yeah, it's transforming through AI is not just a technical challenge. That is a part of it, certainly, right? But it's also a cultural transformation, like Victoria described, and it starts top down. Top down, meaning where the senior leadership believe AI's place is within the organization, right? And that sets the tone for the organization. That sets the risk appetite for the risk organization, right? How much of these tools you want to use? How do you want to use them? How do you want to include humans and in the feedback process, right? What interactions would you want? That's just the tone for how you want to use these tools, right? So that cultural aspect is really important. Once you have that governance, the vision at the organizational level, what you have to do is then execute on that. And I would say training is a huge part of it, a huge part of transformation, right? Helping employees understand how to use these tools, how to leverage these tools, and really making it, really tailoring that training for individual teams, individual roles. So for example, I may teach the organization on prompting, right? And we can all do that. But what does prompting mean for an accountant? What does prompting mean for a salesperson, right? They mean different things because the way you write the prompt is different, because what you want to get out of the large language model is going to be different, right? So you have to customize that training. And in addition, when these individuals see training that's adapted to what they do, they actually get a lot more excited. Like, oh, I know how to use that prompt for my client X now, right? So it becomes a lot more tangible for them. So that sort of customized training, I think, is a very important part of it, right? So hopefully by doing all of these things, and then by the way, by rewarding, the use cases that really work, right? Highlighting the successes, right? Making sure that you bring that out. That hey, here's what organization rewards. This is a great use case by Victoria. This is fantastic. Look what she's done, right? So by reinforcing that, those successes, you build the culture that you want, right? So all of those elements, I think, are an important part of an AI journey.
Okay. So the real differentiator is not the algorithm itself. It's how people communicate the algorithm among themselves and within their different business functions.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know that in our industry, there's some powerful models, techniques, tools, right? And many times, the hurdle is not the tools or techniques or models themselves. It's how we apply them and how we internalize them, and hopefully how we adapt them to the practical, real life world that we live in, right? So that is always the challenge.
That's right. So in that statement that you just made, you brought up effectively, implicitly maybe, sort of like the breadth of AI applications and implementations within large enterprise, within large industry, right? You mentioned accountants, you mentioned, on the investment side. Let's talk a little bit about that breadth. So most of the public conversation, or at least maybe, in the world where you and I revolve in, focus on investing, but it's not just our world. It's also because this is the most visible part, right? It's easy. It's like fun to talk about this, but I wonder if there's much more of the true transformation is occurring or should be occurring in areas that are, maybe less glamorous, but absolutely essential. So where do you see AI sort of like making the biggest influence, maybe in the near term, or maybe, over, like certain, I don't know, 5 years? So it's hard to predict 5 years.
Yeah. 5 years is a really long time. Maybe next week is more likely, right? But look, I think you're right that when these tools first came out, and even when I started using these tools, I was focused on the investing side. And the reason is because, as I said before, we've been using traditional AI for decades, right? So this was an evolution of that. So therefore, we're thinking, can these tools help us make better forecasts? That's why the starting point is in that area. Now, having said that, my role does encompass the whole organization, and we've seen lots of impacts across the different areas, right? So, I mean, maybe a few areas that I would say would be coding. Coding, being a developer, that is an area where we've seen measurable impact, right? Having these tools help you code better, code faster, and then I think more importantly, document your code, right? So I think that's really real impact there, and not just in finance. I think in general, people have seen lots of impacts there. Secondly, I would say on the distribution side, client engagement, marketing, right? Those are areas where these tools can really help us understand our clients better, understand our business models better, and really help our advisors think about what the next best action is in terms of engaging, hopefully, better with our clients. Lots of opportunities there, and these tools are definitely used for things like that. Risk management and extension of what we just said about investing. Lots of applications in there, not just understanding the markets better, but tools like synthetic data generation, right? Giving us more ways to think about what a crisis might look like. Can we use these tools to simulate that, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, we don't want to see an event like COVID again, but if we want to simulate how our models may work.
But we want to be ready.
Exactly. This may be a way. And so as you think about these impacts across these different areas, you might want to think about, well, how do I measure like impacts across these different areas? And I usually like to describe impact in three ways. The first is linear. Linear impact is, I know how to summarize, these tools save me like 5, 10%, 15% of my time because now I can summarize emails faster. That's great stuff, linear. Next one is exponential, right? Now we're moving further ahead. Linear is about doing the same things, but faster. Exponential is about doing more things, right? Being able to do more things that you have not been able to do before. I'll give you one example. I'm a research analyst, and usually when you ask me to cover a company, I look at these 20 websites. Great, and I've, so by using AI, maybe I can do that faster. That's linear. Exponential is instead of just look at the 10 websites, maybe these large language models look at 50 websites. Now, 30 of them may be useless, but maybe there's a few that may be very, very powerful that I have not seen before, right? So now I'm able to do more than what I've done before. That's an exponential impact. Maybe the impact is in the 30, 40, 50% range. The last type of impact I like to talk about is transformational. And this is what we all aim to do, even though it will take some time. Transformational is really about just redesigning a whole workflow, right? Meaning you don't need to do things the way you've always done it, right? And our industry is prone to this. I mean, we've done things pretty much the same way ever since I've joined. And we have the various groups, we do the functions that we do. Do these tools give us opportunities to reimagine what our business looks like, to imagine how we engage with clients, to imagine how we make investments, and therefore transform the way that we run our business. I think it's an opportunity there, but I think that's further out.
It sounds like the values in the plumbing, something that you don't really see, but you cannot function without.
Yeah. So, certainly, it's in the plumbing, and I would say it's also in the imagination of the leaders, right?
That's right.
Which is why creating leaders who understand both the potential of these tools as well as the risks of these tools, hopefully can bring out their imagination and therefore new business models and opportunities going forward.
Right. You just brought up large language models, right? Like everybody's talking about large language models, whether you're investing or not, right? They move sort of like from novelty to everyday utility. So the more they help us, make maybe more informed investment, risk decisions, right? Accelerate research exponentially, linearly. The changes the day-to-day expectations for many roles, right? So, you talked about, the right talent already, but how do you think should finance professionals think about their role, whether it's research, communication, productivity inside the firm? Talk to us about it.
Yeah. Look, this is a topic I'm really passionate about because I really believe that large language model is going to transform how our industry runs, how we do research, how we do investments. And so I'll give you one simple example that I think LLMs are going to really change how the investment teams operate. So right now, for example, we usually have two types of researchers. We have discretionary or fundamental managers, and then we have quantitative or systematic managers. So both of those teams are typically separate and they do things differently. Discretionary managers are ones that that really understands, let's say, stocks really, really well, and they do deep research into companies, right? Traditional fundamental research. What they don't have, by the way, is breadth, meaning they can only do it for a few specific companies because it takes a lot of time. How do they do it over a range of companies? LLMs give them that breadth. They now can take their insights and use these tools to apply them across a wider range of companies. So that's the opportunity for discretionary managers. On the quantitative and systematic side, as you all know, they have breadth, meaning they use models that can be applied across all the securities in the universe, but they don't have much depth, right? Usually factors that they look at momentum, value, which is great, but these tools give them more nuance. You can now understand a lot more about companies. You can look at earnings calls or filings to understand things like obviously sentiment, but also like management quality, deception, evasiveness. Right. You can use these tools to understand more nuance about the companies. Therefore, these tools give systematic managers depth, right? So this is how these tools can potentially help. It gives discretionary managers breadth, so they can cover more, and it gives the systematic managers depth, so they can understand these assets that they're investing in a lot better, right? So I see this evolution happening and empowering all types of investors to be better. But it also means, by the way, that the edge everybody has is eroding, and we have to get all of us better, to get to the next phase.
That's right. But also, if sort of like thinking from my vantage point, right, as an educator, I think because foundationally LLMs, much like, predictive analytics, are highly technical concepts, there is a misconception out there that everybody needs to be, to have a deep technical expertise. But perhaps, educating people the right way to give them just the right level of familiarity is enough to understand what these tools can and cannot do, and then enough to be able to question an output, to recognize when something looks off, right? Or to use the technology in a way that actually strengthens, right? Rather than shortcuts their judgment, right? Like I think that kind of goes along perhaps with that example that you just offered.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And you just mentioned some of the critical skills that are needed for leaders to leverage these tools well, right? Knowing how to use them well, not necessarily knowing how they're coded or how they're developed, but knowing the assumptions, where they're weak, where they're not so good, and then knowing the use cases where these are most powerful. A leader hopefully will understand that, and then therefore apply those learnings in the appropriate areas.
Right. And there is also, this inherent risk aversion, right? Again, we want to be right 100% of the time. And given how quickly AI seems to be scaling across business lines, firms that probably have to start establishing some boundaries, right, and expectations among, different units and, the uses of AI in real time. The challenge seems is how do we ensure that, the ways that are safe, consistent, and defensible, right, across, especially if we're talking across different teams. So let's talk about the understanding this risk, right? Like, what should a decision-making process look like when a financial institution sets their AI and hopefully responsible AI policies?
Yeah, it just starts with the governance framework and the governance process, right? So we talked a bit about like the firm's risk appetite and for senior management to articulate that. I think that's the beginning of it. Once you have that, then you can have a governance process, a governance committee, let's say, that vets use cases, that ensures that the tools are being used appropriately. They set the policies and procedures that you expect employees to follow. I actually find that having this governance structure actually stimulates innovation rather than stifle innovation, because once you have the rules of the road, the employees know what to do, and they can be very creative and very intelligent in terms of how they want to use these tools. So I think that's actually helpful by having a good framework in place, right? And obviously we didn't talk about training and things like that. I would also say that making sure the organization has the foundational tools that you want your employees to use is critical, right? You want to build those tools so they don't need to go home and they use, I'm at home or something like that. You want to make sure they have the foundational tools at work that you want them to use. Then, of course, then teaching the employees to use those tools. Get the tools, teach them how to use it. And on the policy side, I would just highlight data. Data is the biggest issue, especially in financial services, right? We care a lot about data. We want to make sure that that the data is private. And as you all know, the regulations are around the world, right? That really defined, what data can be or cannot be used, right? So I would say that having a clear policy on how data and what data can be used within these tools is a critical area that organizations have to think through, right? Because you don't want to lose any of that data, and you want to protect that. And some data, by the way, is proprietary. You don't want to share that information. So a clear data policy is important.
That's right. That's right. But ultimately, responsibility is not just a technical feature, right? It's a combination of communication, judgment, and very clear decision making, right? And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, right, there's another question is, once you have the guardrails in place, once you establish this, responsible use foundation, the focus shifts to competitiveness, to, differentiating factors. And now that everyone has access to powerful LLMs, the same LLMs, can the firms still meaningfully differentiate themselves? Or are we just going to end up having, the same insight?
Well, if we all have the same insight, that would be quite boring, right? But look, I think that's why it's important for us to become educated on these tools, right? Especially within finance, because the way we use these tools in different industries is different. And so having a way to learn how these tools can be used in finance is critical, right? So I would highlight a couple of areas maybe, where folks can differentiate themselves, even as these tools, become very similar across vendors, right? One is around proprietary data. I think that is an edge that organizations will have, because if you have data in terms of how you do research, how you make the investments, how you engage your clients, doesn't really matter what it is. That is data that's really useful, because you can then turn that data, feed it back into your models, by the way, and then fine-tune the models so that the models will now be aligned with your philosophies, right, and your way of thinking. I think that process, fine-tuning, is going to be a way that every one of us can differentiate ourselves, right? So learning how to do that, learning when it's important, when it's not important, is a important competency that executives should have. And then we touched on prompting earlier, right? So obviously that's also important. Learning how to prompt well within the area that you're in is important. So learning these skills and capabilities to provide context, to set up the question correctly, to help each other define the problem. I think those are ways you can differentiate yourself in terms of using these tools. And then over time, I would imagine each of us will have our own areas of emphasis and competency, and therefore we'll use these tools differently going forward.
Right. So not much different, different tools, different areas, for, where people refine, interpret tools and data, but much like, one company, one global bank, one asset manager, one hedge fund differentiates themselves from the peer group, that pretty much still stays.
Yeah, I think so. Otherwise, I won't have a job.
Neither would I, right? In educating our students. And speaking of education, we certainly, like I said in the beginning, I definitely see the shift, and more of our students are interested in data science and AI. So should we shift to the audience questions?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I will address one of the first ones. We talked about human in the loop, right? Just a bit in this webinar. There's a question about whether there are instances where a human in the loop may not be needed, right? So it's an excellent question. I would say in finance, most areas will require human in the loop because of our fiduciary obligation, right? So on the investment side, and also on the client-facing side, I would expect that there will be a human in the loop all the time, right? Because that's what our clients expect. That's what our regulators expect. Now, there may be some areas where very simple, low-risk use cases where you may not. So, for example, if Victoria sends me an email every single day, and I want to summarize it, every week, and then I want to suggest an email that I want to send back, okay, maybe I don't need a human in the loop there. It's low risk. I know Victoria well, and if there is an issue, she's going to call me and say, Andrew, why did you say that, right? So it's low risk, right? So I would imagine there are use cases like that that are probably more internal facing, and more efficiency oriented, where you may not need a human. But I think anything that touches investments, touches clients, will require human in the loop.
Okay. So what other questions do we have? So I said there's a question about security concerns when dealing with client data for personalization purposes, open source versus closed source data. I think you touched on that when we were talking about responsible AI.
Yeah. I mean, this question about the open source, closed source models, and then data privacy. I mean, one of the reasons why we thought we wanted to create a program and a certificate around AI in finance is because we want the leaders, future leaders, to really understand the trade-offs of what these tools can do and the responsibility that we all have, right, as corporate citizens and as citizens of society, right? So,
right.
So part of the learning will be around that. Like, how do we choose when we use proprietary closed source models and when do we use open source models, right? So, these closed source models from all the big vendors that they're really, really good, right? And so, so for some types of things where high quality, fast response is needed, those tools are excellent, right? There are other ones. I'll give you one example where we have processes where we are trying to look for alpha factors or high return factors within different types of media, different types of audio, video, text, and things like that. You can imagine there's a lot of text out there, right? And so we have these agents which are trying to look for signals. You can imagine that process takes a long time and costs a lot of money, right? So in those cases, what we do is we would leverage open source models to try to see if we can replicate or do some of the same things that the more powerful models may be able to do, right? Because it's a more cost-efficient way to do it. And the point about data is exactly right. And there are some cases where we are very uncomfortable loading the sensitive information into some of the the closed source models, right? So we prefer to have the open source model within our own network, and then processing the data within our own network, because we know the data won't leave our organization, right? So those are trade-offs that I would expect future leaders to be able to dissect through and then think about what the right decision is.
How do you see the world models of physical AI playing roles in the finance investment business process? That's an interesting one.
Yeah. Even though we've been talking about AI for a bit, and we've been hearing a lot about it in the press, we're still very early. We're still like in the early stages of it. So for those of you who know baseball, we're still in the very early innings, of this AI revolution, which means, by the way, that we can't really envision exactly how things will play out. Some of the things I'm saying today may be completely wrong, in 2 years, right? So it's important to remember that. It also means, by the way, that we should be very adaptive and nimble in terms of the models that we use, because there might be different, more powerful models in the future, right? Now, having said all that, the questions around different types of models, these models that we see out there, the large language models, are purpose-built. They're meant to be good at many, many different things, right? Some of them are like geared towards like solving math Olympiad problems, but in general, they're good at very general things. I suspect that we're going to have to fine-tune some of these models for finance, right? Because we look at the world slightly differently. We value different things, right? So I suspect companies will improve the quality of the models for their own purposes by fine-tuning those. On the physical side, I don't know. I mean, most of what we do in finance, is not on the physical side, right? But I would expect like AI, impacting robots and things like that. That will happen. I don't know to the extent what happened in finance, but as a society as a whole, I think that will certainly happen. And then, in terms of these world models and other, broad models, yeah, certainly lots of things that we can learn from those general purpose models and trying to adapt them to finance.
Right. I'm almost thinking, the flow trading with many screens, whether, like this can be somehow optimized for human consumption and take some of the pressure of, the human traders. Maybe that's what physical comes in. I don't know, but I think we only, at this point, I think we're only limited by the limits of our creativity. That's it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and human creativity has no bounds.
Yeah, I see a question around cultural change, right, and how to think through that, and how to communicate the impact of these changes, right? That is a sensitive one, right? It's definitely not easy.
Very important.
Yeah, and so that from a leadership perspective, this is part of it. Technology is one piece of it. Cultural transformation and leading that change management is also another important part. I think the first thing that we all have to do is it comes from the top. So what is your vision for how these tools are going to work, right? From the very start, Victoria and I talked about these tools as augmenting humans, right? Hopefully amplifying what humans can do today, right? So if you position it that way, hopefully every employee will see that, look, we're trying to help every single employee hopefully get better at their roles, right? That's important. But then you have to back that up. And how do you back that up? You have to train them, right? You can't just say that and not teach the employee how to use these tools and really leverage the tool to be more effective in their particular roles, right? So doing that training is the way you back up your words and say, look, I'm really invested in you. I really want to develop you so you can use these tools better. But I also continue to need you as a subject matter expert. You still need to be a great accountant. You still need to be a great research analyst. But I'm going to help you use these tools, right? And then, you continuously train that individual and monitor their progress and then get their feedback, right? And then if you do that, it's a joint partnership, a collaboration to help the individual. And that takes time, that takes resources, right? But I think that is a way that you really can really make sure that your employees are aligned with the vision that the broader organization has.
That's right. There's certainly some, burden shifting maybe to the shoulders of more junior people to learn to educate themselves, to using the word upskill themselves, to interpret and explain the intuition behind the tools to senior managers. And I think this is where we're beginning to see that convergence between technical and non-technical talent. And in my opinion, it's very important for junior people, not for junior, and also not for senior people to recognize that, right? Like for the very long time, students who come out, out of my alumni coming out of my program, which is, effectively master in financial engineering, we were viewed as geeks with formulas, right? And then there was like other finance people who are, the regular finance people. And we were either parallel or even like at some point divergent, sort of, right? Like there was no crossover in industries. I think this now we are merging, right? Like I don't think you can be truly successful in this, AI transformational financial industry, AI transform financial industry without being able to cross over and explain their intuition. You cannot just rely on the model, on the formula. And the same way for people who are not trained in technical terms, they need to be able to, develop the, some sort of sense, some sort of language and ability to communicate with technical people more closely, not just for, relying on a project manager who goes and talks to, my IT people. So I think that is very, very important.
Yeah, I think you highlight two important elements of this I'm person vision that I was saying, right? You need domain expertise.
That's right.
And then you need fluency around how to use these tools well, right? So both of those are critical if you want to be successful. And interestingly, LLMs actually give our younger employees or younger graduates, let's say, an opportunity to actually do it much faster, right? Because these tools really help you decrease the learning process, right? So I used to think by being in the industry for 30 years, I have so much experience, so much insight. That it's so hard, for somebody to really erode my edge. But that's no longer true, right? Recent grads can come out, they can learn a lot of things that I already know and gain some experiences that very quickly. And then therefore, that's why I talk about the traditional edge that we have being eroded over time by using these tools. So even for myself, I have to continue to learn. I have to continue to get better, right? It's no longer by, well, I learned X in school and therefore that's enough, and I just kind of continue, right? We have to find a way to continuously learn, and and programs like these, and also these large language models can hopefully get us there.
That's right. That's right. We are really, I think, moving forward towards the world where everyone needs to have this sort of like shared baseline of understanding. And I think the sooner, especially junior people, but not just the junior people, the sooner professionals on both sides embrace that, I think the stronger they will be in their careers. And honestly, this is the shift that I'm seeing in terms of, as in our financial engineering program, we have the final semester in New York City where you teach, where our curriculum kind of like evolves with financial industry, right, and adjusts to the skills that are needed by our students. I see it not as do students still need to be strong Python programmers, or is it all about prompt engineering? I don't see that as a real issue. I see that what really matters is develop ability to question the outputs, run sort of like this mental smell test and recognize when something simply doesn't make sense. Right?
Yeah.
Don't just rely on models.
That's right. I mean, the reason that I love teaching at Cornell is because I really feel like I'm building future leaders, right? I'm helping create future leaders. So in this particular case, it's about building leaders who are able to leverage these tools well, but also do it in a responsible way, right? And that is phenomenal, right? If we have leaders who are able to do both of them well, then everybody's gonna be better off, not just in finance, but society at large, right? So that's why I feel really good about this.
That's right. Well, I could not have asked for better praise, I'll be honest with you. But also I'm excited about the AI in Finance certificate that we're launching, because this, like, we're going to bring that philosophy right into the certificate. That's sort of like step-by-step education of actually people who are already in industry, right? That's not a degree program. Trying to start with the basics, but then demonstrate more and more existing tools to build intuition. But ultimately, we want these people to come out of taking certificate and say, like, okay, I understand that what kind of discipline is needed around AI transformation, or I know what questions to ask, or I know how to maybe frame the opening conversation with my management or my colleagues about this. That's right.
Yeah, it's being able to blend human judgment, which hopefully we have, with machine intelligence, is going to be a true skill, and we should all learn how to do that well.
Andrew, thank you so much. This was fun, and I'm looking forward to another decade of collaboration and partnership.
Thank you, Victoria, for your time, and it was great seeing you all, and best of luck.
Thank you.